In tonight's round table, we are in discussion with reporters who were on the ground 8 years ago when police shot and killed 34 miners who had gathered on the Kopi in Marikana. Remember, they had gathered as they were protesting for salary increases, demanding 12,500 from lawmen, and then, of course, the gunshots. Where were you when you heard that the miners were shot dead? I was actually traveling at the time, and I remember being in Europe and seeing South Africa making the front page of a newspaper. At the time, they were still saying 16 miners were actually killed. And I remember feeling cold, and that's when I went and searched for the internet to just go and read up and see more. And then when I went on international news agencies, this was the only story that they were all reporting on. Of course, 8 years on, sadly, police are yet to be prosecuted for the killings. We've also had a whole commission of inquiry where we had the Farlam Commission making some serious recommendations. Do you think our police have changed their tactics in public policing, which was the key issue here? So I'm in discussion with Eyewitness News Assignments Editor, Nicolaides, SABC political reporter, Patrick Dintwa, and former EWN video journalist, Taurai Maduna. And of course, he is now a freelance video journalist. Before we go into this discussion, let's listen in to this report prepared by Nicolaides, who was in Marikana at the time.
On the 9th of August 2012, Marikana miners embarked on an unprotected strike, one that would make international headlines.
He don't have the money. I want the 12.5. 12,500.
The protests quickly became violent, and by the 14th of August, 10 people had been killed.
We're live now to Nicolaides, who's there. Gia, when was the latest victim discovered?
Taurai, police haven't yet confirmed the latest death, but journalists spotted the body and have taken photographs of the victim this afternoon when protesters were dispersing from a spot near Hilltop in a township here in the mining district. The man appears to have been beaten, and blood could be seen dripping from his face. People walked past him without hesitation. Earlier, protesters held a meeting there and warned women to stay away.
On the morning of the 16th of August, Northwest Police Commissioner Zogiswa Mbombo told the media the violence would end.
We have deployed these various units in order to make sure that today we end this violence. Should there be lack of cooperation, we will be compelled to exercise our rights in terms of our mandate.
Police have been trying to negotiate a truce with protesters since Monday. They will ask them to hand over their weapons today and try and disperse the crowd in an amicable way.
Unfortunately, it doesn't seem as if negotiations have proven successful, and the South African Police Service is going to have to go over to a tactical phase.
We cross live now to Nicolaides, who's at the Marikana mine. Gia, I believe that rubber bullets have just been fired.
Yes, Taurai, chaos has actually erupted. Police started firing rubber bullets just a few minutes ago. Thousands of protesters started running down the hill, some of them towards police.
Yeah, of course, we now know that those were not rubber bullets, but it was in fact live ammunition. Just hearing that sound again, Gia, just remind us, where were you when those shots were fired?
Well, I was standing, Mahlatse, just behind the police line. And at the time, I decided that I was going to move behind one of the police nyalas. And Taurai, who is with me, courageously moved forward with many of the other photographers and videographers to try and capture those images. And you're right, at first, we thought it was just rubber bullets, and it was rubber bullets in the beginning. And then police started using live rounds. And I think there was a lot of confusion at the time. We saw people dropping to the ground. And it was only after that, as you saw the dust settling in that area, did we go back and look, and we saw a number of people lying on the ground. Some of them were visibly dead, but we weren't able to do a count at that particular point. The police were obviously all around us. They moved in, they'd cordoned off the area and tried to push us back. And we were waiting for some sort of assistance from paramedics. And it actually took quite a long time for paramedics to arrive on the scene to help some of these people who are lying on the ground. But the sound of those gunshots, I remember it clearly, and my ears were ringing. And in a moment of panic, the only thing I knew that I could do was look down at my recorder and make sure that the record button was on. So I slipped into a journalist mode straight away, because I think to have thought of anything else at that point would have been too difficult. So I slipped into journalist mode, and thereafter tried to figure out what had actually happened. Why did police use live rounds?
Yeah. And I know that adrenaline just kicks in, but of course, that sound never, ever leaves you. I mean, I was reading up again and just got reminded that 284 live rounds were actually fired on the day. And there were about, I think, just over 500 non-lethal that were actually fired by police. Patrick Dintwa, let me bring you in here. Where were you at that moment? And just hearing those gunshots again, what thoughts are you having?
Like Mahlatse, obviously on that particular day, we have been in Marikana for almost the entire week, covering the story just before the actual shooting. But on the actual day, on the 16th, I remember it vividly. It was on a Thursday, just after 3 o'clock. We could see that something is going to happen, because by that time, the police were preparing themselves. I can still remember that barbed wire that was erected between the police and us. We were behind the police, by the way. And then the workers, striking workers, were on that other side. The Nyalas were coming in. We could see that as the then provincial commissioner, Zukisam Bombo, said in the morning of that, in the press conference, that the strike is going to end that day. We could sense that that thing is going to end. But we didn't thought that they are going to kill people. What we thought is that in a normal protest, you think that they are going to use water cannons, they are going to use rubber bullets just to disperse people like they normally do in protests. But that did not happen. Like my colleague is saying, I can remember those sound of bullets. It still ring even today. Those sounds is still ringing in my mind. It was really a bad day that day.
The other sound that has also stayed with me is that one police officer also saying, "Cease fire, and just hearing his desperation at the time and just being overpowered by that sound of those bullets. Taurai, you are a video journalist. At that moment, what were you doing? Were you able to continue filming? I mean, today we can see some of the pictures that you were actually able to shoot on the day.
I kept rolling because initially we thought, okay, as Patrick said, it's another protest. They're going to fire rubber bullets, they'll fire water cannons, it's going to be action, it's going to be fun. So yeah, because we've been going to Marikana for the whole week. You go in the morning, you sit, nothing happens, you go again. And that day, initially, I was supposed to be in class. I was studying at Vita on that day, at that time. And on that day, I told my editor that, no, today I can't go to class. Today I need to go to class because I've missed so many lessons. And he said, listen, I'll call your lecturer because I really need you. And I was just fed up with being there for the whole week, because you go there, nothing happens. It's a long drive back to Joburg, and then you could sort of feel that, okay, maybe something is happening, because also on that day, there were not a lot of journalists that had gone to Marikana on that day, because people had been staying away, saying we go there every day, nothing happens. And then around 3, the barbed wire is moving in, and okay, we're filming. And then they start shooting. And at that moment, you are just focusing on filming what's in front of you. There was a lot of dust. And then you start to hear things like firecrackers, and you're like, what's going on? But And then later, when after ceasefire, we're moving forward, and then we see there are people lying there, there's blood. And then I'm like, no, they can't have shot people. It's not possible. You're like, no, it's not possible. It's not possible. It's not possible. Police don't shoot people. You know, they don't fire live ammunition. And then as we get closer, you can just see that it's chaos. And at that stage, we just continue. You're just in that mode to just capture what's going on. And it's only later that you start to reflect that, wow, the police shot people and it just happened there. But at that moment, you're just so detached. It's like you're just filming, documenting what you need to document, just doing your job. And it's only later that you sort of see the significance of what happened.
And Gia, for you, when did you start realizing that there are people dead? Police actually shot at people and they are now dead. And was there any reaction from the people around you that you remember?
Well, I think the first moment that I realized that people were actually dead was when I was doing a live crossing to David O'Sullivan during afternoon drive on 702. And he was asking me to describe the scene. He said, what can you see? You know, we're hearing reports that people have been injured. Can you move any closer? And I was on my cell phone and I was walking closer and closer towards the scene. And that's when I remember saying, I can count 5 bodies, that I'm quite certain that these people are dead. They were lying spread out in the field. But obviously there were more people, but that's what I could see at the time. And it was after that live crossing, Mahlatse, that I realized that people had actually died. Because as my colleagues have described, when the rubber bullets started going off, we had already seen the water cannon, we heard the stun grenades, but we didn't realize at that point that live rounds had been used. I think in that moment, it happened so quickly that we didn't realize that people had actually died. And after that live crossing, I put down the phone and I just took a moment and looked around me, and the journalists were scrambling. People were crossing live to their TV stations. They were on the phone to various radio stations. People were jotting down notes. We're trying to get comment from police. I remember running after one of the police spokespeople on the ground. His name was Dennis Adrio. And I was trying to say to him, what happened? Did people actually get killed in this situation? And of course, he was scrambling for information too. And the police all of a sudden sort of moved us back completely. They said, we must move back. They then brought that police tape and started pushing us further and further away, because I think we were almost in the middle of it. We were right.
You were in the crime scene at that moment. I mean,
yeah.
Obviously it was only later on that we started seeing that some people were actually shot in the back because they were actually running away from the police. And, you know, it was only probably for a lot of us with the commission that we started getting the details of what exactly happened. Patrick, let's move back a little bit. Obviously, we're talking around August 16, 2012, but we know that before then, things had already been tense in Marikana, and there were already about 9 people who were killed in that area. And it was 4 minors, 2 police officers, and 2 security guards. But also, their killings were not just ordinary killings.
Indeed, Mahlatse, prior to the actual day of the 16th, there were a lot of things happening. Remember, it was a strike, the so-called illegal strike by the workers demanding the 12,500. Now, there were other workers. Some believed that they were belonging to the NUM. Those were not in strike. So as a result, there were a group of workers trying to go and mobilize support that other workers must join them. So along the way, or along that mobilization process, there were fatalities, casualties, by the way. Other people were killed. I can vividly also remember that I was working with my colleague Kabelo Molupe from television. We went to a mining area, not around Marikana, where we found a police officers hacked to death because they were trying to stop, even security guards, they were trying to stop these miners that were going, to take out people from the hostels and people out of the shafts. So really, we could see that this is going to bring into something bigger. But we never thought that it will come to that day on the 16th of August, which to me, by then, when I see on that particular day, it was like a movie. It was like I'm watching a movie. I still remember, like I'm saying, I'm repeating, the sounds. It happened so quickly. Within seconds, people were shot, people were laid down, and later, then on that actual day, the emergency medical personnel, they took long even to come into the scene. So like I'm saying, it was really a bad day.
Taurai, I mean, you said something earlier, which I guess speaks to the work that we do as reporters, where, you're expecting another violent protest and police will use rubber bullet. And that has become kind of a very ordinary or normal thing to expect in South Africa when people are protesting, and there are usually clashes with police. I mean, now when you actually look back, do you see the signs that, this is how, where we got here? I mean, Gia herself was talking about how the police were basically saying this must end today.
Yeah, but when they say this must end today, we never thought it was an issue where they were going to kill people. I think they had a plan to disperse people and then maybe things got out of control. I really don't know. But it's not the normal way in which the police operated when they come to these protests. We also know that we go behind the police, we are safer, because if we go to the miners, the police will be caught in between. But we never thought that anything like this would happen.
And how do you cope? How do you cope having witnessed something like this? What happened the days afterwards? I've got a question here from our listeners who want to know, as reporters, having witnessed something so violent, how do you cope?
It was it's very funny that when you're there and days after, you got family calling you, we can see you on TV, are you okay? You're like, no, I'm fine, and they're like, you could have died, it was dangerous. And also when you review the footage, you begin to realize that it was actually very dangerous, anything could have happened. But fortunately, I mean, we at Eyewitness News, we offered counseling sessions. So they gave us time to go and speak to someone about the events. We took time off. So there was a bit of support in terms of moving forward after the event. But personally, I'd been to so many of these events where I covered news. I saw so much death. In the end, it's like a normal day when you're carrying out your activities, because you see so much death. In the end, at times you don't feel that much pain, because you're just there. You click, you film, you go back, you file the story, tomorrow something else is happening. But Marikana was different because we'd never experienced anything like that. And I think also at the end of the year, I just got tired of covering breaking news. And I left.
And you left?
Yeah,
you left.
Because I just got tired. I'd been working on breaking news for a long time. I just felt like I need a new challenge, because continuously doing this kind of work, covering this kind of scenes was no longer exciting, exhilarating for me anymore.
I've got two other questions here, and all of them are saying that we are not talking about the fact that the miners themselves were actually armed. Were they in fact armed, Gia? And what could you see? What were they holding in their hands? Because police were also telling us that this was in self-defense as they charged at the miners.
So yes, they were armed, but they were armed with sticks, pangas, knobkerries, bush knives. And there was one particular miner who was actually caught on camera with a firearm. And that was the only firearm that was discharged towards the police or during that time of the shooting. But yes, they were armed, and but it wasn't armed with the same kind of equipment that the police were armed with. So there was a difference in that. Yes, I do think that the police were intimidated by these striking miners. Remember that there were about 3,000 miners who had gathered on this kopje. And the miners had themselves declared the kopje as a sacred place, a sacred piece of land, where they decided to represent themselves. They distanced themselves from all unions. They wanted to speak to Lonmin management themselves. Lonmin management refused, but I think that there was this tension between the police and the miners from the very beginning because of those 10 killings that we had seen in the days leading up to the 16th of August. So there was definitely this tension. 2 of those police officers were killed, 2 security guards and other miners in these altercations that happened in those days before. So when the miners refused to disarm themselves, put their weapons down, and as I said, that there were sticks, pangas, bush knives, etc. When they refused to do that, that's when the police had decided, after a lot of negotiating back and forth, that they were going to move to what they called a tactical phase. But as Patrick and Taurai have adequately described, there was no way that we could have anticipated that it would have led to that kind of bloodshed. And you'd also mentioned, Mahlatse, that there was a lot of people who were killed where we were at scene 1. But just further down at the small kopje was scene 2, where some of those miners were actually shot in the back. We were quite far from that scene. So when initially reporting, we reported on what we saw, and all the visuals that you see is from the media at scene 1. But there was no way that we could have seen what was happening just around that small kopje, where other miners were also shot and killed, some of them in the back, by police officers.
If you're just joining us, it's now 29 minutes after 8 o'clock. It is the Inside Eyewitness News Roundtable. We are remembering the Marikana massacre. It's 8 years on. I am joined by reporters who were actually on the ground on the day reporting on this massacre. It's Eyewitness News' assignments editor, Nicolaides, and then we've also got SABC political reporter Patrick Dintwa and former EWN Eyewitness News' video journalist Taurai Maduna. Just to go, Patrick, of course, at the time, there was also tension between the miners and also the media. I found it to be a very difficult place to build a relationship with the miners and speak to them quite openly. Just take us through in terms of trying to tell that story and the difficulties of that time.
Indeed, during that period, like my colleague earlier said, the striking workers declared the kopje as secret. There was a point where we were not even allowed to come nearer the kopje. But as the week progresses, we managed steadily but surely to come closer. But what I can also confirm is that it was very difficult by then to even have a comment from one of the workers to say, what do you want? Unless if you go and get them, probably because they were converging every morning at the kopje, but at around 12:01 they were going out in groups. I believe it was now lunchtime. Some were going. It is then that you can able then outside the kopje to grab one and say, what do you want? What is that you want? Somebody will take you, but they will tell you not to mention their name.
Patrick, you were just saying now that it was quite difficult to win the trust of the miners. But I know that you have returned to Marikana this week. When you go back now, 8 years on, is that anger still palpable? Because that's what I always felt when I was in that area.
Totally different now, Mahlatse. But if you want to go to Marikana now, you should via the president of AMCU, Tate Joseph Matunga, because even the interviews that we conducted yesterday, it was through his help, because apparently there's an agreement, standing agreement with AMCU, workers or leadership that they should not talk to the media up until they've got permission from head office. But we managed. But what I can confirm is that it's totally different as compared to 8 years back. That time it was very difficult because I wanted to make a point that during that week, when we were there as journalists, there were a number of journalists, both male and female, from all the media houses. Dia will bear testimony to that. The female colleagues were not allowed to come closer to the copy by then because there was a belief that there were rituals that they performed there. I can remember that there was a day where a traditional healer was summoned to come to the copy and perform some rituals. So our female colleagues were not even allowed to come closer. At least with us, we could, come closer and speak to others because the tradition. Because majority of those people that were there were Xhosa people coming from the Eastern Cape. So they believe in tradition. So it was very difficult by then. But like I'm saying, comparatively speaking, now it is much better as compared to 8 years ago or 7 years ago.
And Gia, maybe you can come in there and just tell us about your experience as a female reporter and that it was so difficult. I mean, you do detail it in your book, that it was just a very difficult assignment.
That's right. And it was extremely difficult for female journalists. And in my book, I actually speak about several women and their experiences. Some had received threats from the miners themselves. And at the time, we didn't really understand it, but slowly we were starting to figure out what was going on. We understood that the copy was sacred ground. It was for men exclusively, and their meetings, their negotiations, and their rituals were taking place. And that's why they didn't want women anywhere near that copy. So every time a female journalist tried to get a little bit closer, even if it was with their male counterparts, we were immediately told to stand back, and others were given threats at that particular time. You must also understand, though, Mahlatse, that the miners themselves didn't trust anyone. They didn't trust police, they didn't trust Lonmin management, and they didn't trust the media, which is why it took us such a long time to build those relationships. I think it was only after the 16th of August that we started getting interviews with some of those miners more regularly, and of course then during the Commission of Inquiry. But there was this deep sense of distrust when it came to the miners, because all they wanted to do was negotiate a living wage with Lonmin management. But they felt from the very beginning that they weren't allowed to do that. And then there were a number of political influences when it came to Marikana. We had Cyril Ramaphosa. He was at the time a non-executive board member of Lonmin, and he in an email had called for concomitant action. We had the police minister then, who was Nathi Mthethwa. We had the Northwest Police Commissioner, Zukiswa Mbombo, and the Police Commissioner, Ria Piecha. And with all these various political influences and people, calling for the violence to end, as you heard in that clip earlier, that's what resulted in police officers from all over the country congregating in this once unknown area, Marikana. And we had hundreds of police officers. And they were, in essence, trying to disperse and disarm these particular miners.
We will continue with the conversation, because one of the things that I want to ask is whether, we have seen police acting differently, especially in controlling the protesters in many communities, because that's what is one of the key findings of the Falem Commission, just that police must actually not use violence as they tend to. We do have a call from Thulani Kwatema. Thulani, you are basically saying that police on that day should not have shot at the miners.
Yes, is what I'm saying. I think the police should have maybe gone there. No, in fact, the police were not supposed to go there. I think the management and Lonmin at the time was supposed to go there and try to negotiate workers, because what workers wanted to do on the day is the day were to negotiate for their living wages, and then I think the likes of Ramaphosa were supposed to convince the management Lonmin to go there and speak to the workers. And then I also believe the general or police, Mbombo, Northwest, and even Riapiecha, even the Minister of Police and then Riapiecha, Natim Feta were supposed to go there and talk to people, not to send the parades. Remember, LA was a commissioner of police at a certain time, and then the parades were formed by him. So I think even the training of the police of this country was not up to scratch, because I have seen people marching against the government all over the world, but we've not seen police turning their automatic weapons against their own citizens. I think Jacob Zuma, at the time as the president, I think he should have stand up and go to Marikana to try to talk sense to the workers and management. But as you know, Mahlase, because these guys were of a union that was of Matunda. Remember, Matunda was once at Kosato, and then when he left Kosato, like the Israelism up today, he was disliked by some in the governing party, that is ANC, and in the Labour movement, that is Kosato. So I still believe like the Falam Commission was not supposed to say what was said. I think Natim Teta was supposed to be charged, Riapiecha was supposed to be charged, Mbombo was supposed to be charged. A lot of people are supposed to be charged. I think the Ramaphosa was supposed to be also charged, because
of course,
at the time.
Of course, Tulani there is just pointing out to the fact that, there wasn't accountability from the political actors at the time. And I'm sure that is something that Napoleon Webster, who's an activist in Marikana, would agree with. Napoleon?
I didn't get the question.
I was saying that our previous caller, Tulani, was just speaking to the fact that there were no senior political actors that were called to account for the Marikana massacre. And I'm sure that is something that you would agree with, and that's something you've been calling for too.
Absolutely, because we have a feeling that Fallen Commission was entirely to cover up for the political big people, and the politicians. To us, they act like security guards of the mining companies. They're just like rented to perform protection duties for the mining companies. It is so bad. I'll give you an example. There's a mine called Tarisa, whereby the community was forcibly relocated for the mining operations. As you enter, that is the first mine as you offer from N4. That mine, that particular mine, there's a man, if you remember the documentary of Marikana, there was a scene around the railway line, and there was this police officer who received a call as he was trying to negotiate with the miners. He received a call and he changed everything. He said, drop your weapons, blah, blah, blah. I hope you remember that scene.
Vaguely.
Yes. His name is William Mpembe, that particular man. That man, he resigned later on, and he is one of the few police officers who are charged with murder. And the very same man, he is working for a mine called Tarisa. That is also implicated in the Lonmin massacre. It is, there's no shame in the mine that they can even hire a man who is implicated on the murdering of the miners. They just hire him so that he perhaps to our understanding, it is just to instigate fear within the communities, to show the communities that you are defeated. We can still kill you.
Is the community of Marikana feeling defeated, though, Napoleon? I mean, every year we tend to focus on the community only when we mark the anniversary of the massacre. do they not, is there no sense of some victory in terms of at least the miners now are earning the more than 12,500 that they earned? They have forced the country to stop and look at its own policing processes?
That salary you're talking about, it was not the struggle was not entirely about the salary only. It was also the living conditions, the housing. The mining companies are creating housing scarcity so that the community members, they fight amongst themselves. I'll give an example where Loanman Sibanye is mining. That land is owned by Bapo. And they have been given a lease of 99 years. Why don't they return that favor to the mine workers so that mine workers, if you are earning more than 10 grand, you can be able to build a dignified structure. So now miners, they don't have, the mines don't have enough houses. On the other side, they're forced to live temporarily in shacks. Imagine you're coming from a mine. You can't even, you have a wife, you're staying in one room because there's not enough land and there's, the kind
you're basically describing a lot of what happens in the mining town. And maybe just to go back to our reporters who are joining us to discuss this and remember Marikana. Patrick, you were in Marikana yesterday. Are there any visible changes in terms of the promises that Lonmin has made, including giving the widows homes to live in?
Absolutely not, Mahlatse, particularly in Nkaneng. Nkaneng is an informal settlement just next to the Gopi. If you go there, even now, the situation is still appalling, it's pathetic. There are no street lights, there's no water, there are no toilets, the roads are so bad. Even the people yesterday that we talked to, they said the situation has not changed. But even Matunga, the president of AMCU, when we spoke to him 2 days ago, he said the social conditions of Nkaneng particularly is appalling. What he even said is that the only benefit that they've got, and through pain, because remember after the Marikana massacre, there was a protracted strike, 5-month strike, where at least Loanmin by then managed to increase salaries of the workers. He confirmed that majority of the workers are earning 14, 15 to 16,000 at least a month with no benefits. But when we come into where these other people are living, the conditions are very appalling. That thing has changed so far. And even government has made a commitment. I remember that the provincial government, local government and housing, together with the Rustenburg municipality, once went there and met with Loanmin management by then to say we will improve their lives by building houses. But that has not happened. If you go there, the situation is still the same.
And the other painful part, I guess, Gia, in all of this is that that whole factor that there isn't anyone prosecuted for this. And that still is one thing that is not allowing the families to find closure.
That's right. After 8 years, some of the families and all of the families of the victims are still waiting for justice to be served. There had been promised on various occasions compensation, which they haven't been given. But of course, the main thing is that no one has been charged or prosecuted. However, there were a group of miners that were actually charged for some of those killings that happened prior to August the 16th. That still hasn't played out completely in court as yet and could drag on for many more years. As I understand it, they still now want to actually have some of those findings from the Farlam Commission reviewed. Because ultimately we had this very lengthy commission of inquiry, which was meant to help us learn lessons from what happened in Marikana, but also to find out what went wrong and who can be prosecuted, because people ultimately died. And 8 years on, that hasn't happened.
And that was a question that we were also getting from Banele Mangoba on our EWN Facebook page, who wanted to know if there has been any repercussions faced by the police. We also do have a caller from Sandringham, Mukoboro. You are saying that police should have fired at the miners.
Yeah, good evening, Mahlase, and you guys that side. Yes, the police were supposed to use the live rounds because the miners also were armed. You must also remember that in the Firearm Commission, there were reports that people were killed. I mean, people were killed prior to the massacre. And one of the police mines of security guards, the parts were taken from him. And they performed rituals. Those rituals before they meet the police. The report, some of the reports were that those miners, after the rituals, the police won't be able to see them. That is why when police were trying to stop them, they say, no, don't cross this line. We will shoot. They keep on moving. You check how those miners were moving.
But Mukobaro, if you remember well, and as the reporters have been telling us, there were people that were armed with pangas, they were not armed with guns. At some point, police had actually cordoned them off and there was a barbed wire around them. So what would justify them firing live ammunition? I mean, one of the things that the Firearm Commission said was that we shouldn't be using live ammunition in controlling protesters.
No. Those people were there to kill because they killed how many people? 10 people prior to be killed. What was the intention? Thereof when you protest, you have to have your placard saying that I want 10,000, 5,000, not a panga. Panga meant to kill or cause a damage. So what is the real reason to have a panga when you are going to a peaceful protest?
But when people do kill, we hope that they are brought to the criminal justice. They're brought through the criminal justice system, and you don't have police firing. I'm going to have to cut you short there and just bring back Taurai. When you look back now, and you go back to Marikana, and the fact that the families there are still looking for closure, does it still also feel like a very incomplete story for you as well?
Yeah, well, I haven't been to Marikana in, I think, like in 7 years. I just passed through when I'm on the N4. And it's sad that what they fought for, what they thought they would get, they didn't get, some of them. And for the families, I mean, they should be asking, was it worth the death of their loved ones? It's a question that I personally, I'm just like, what needs to be done? People have not been charged, both from the miners and both from the police. So justice needs to be done, but justice is just slowed. And I don't know what's going to happen. It's really sad. But yeah.
Let me go through to Ernest in Johannesburg. Ernest, what is your view? We are remembering 8 years of Marikana.
Yes, my view is that I want to comment concerning this previous caller now who said his police were right to massacre those miners who were fighting for their living to earn those 12,500. I think maybe, I don't know which planet is he coming from. He's a member of these gangsters who are ruling this country now. We don't know. We have families among those miners who were killed. And then he makes us very angry. He's not supposed to comment in this way.
Yeah.
He's commenting like someone who is happy to the death of those people who were killed, who were shot for absolutely nothing. If I can ask him that who was more advantage between the police and those people who were carrying panga? The only thing the police were supposed to do was to put the razor wire around those miners and then place the nyalas around them and then ask them that it was very simple to disarm them. And then they'll be hungry and need food and water. And then when they come out and then they said, my man, You leave your weapon, you go out. You leave not to shoot them.
Thank you very much. That was Ernest in Sandringham. Just to bring you back in here, Napoleon, obviously when we talk Marikana, that's the only time we remember it. It's an annual, has become more of an annual event. How would the people of Marikana want us to commemorate this day? And actually, how do we make sure that they do find some closure and their story is not one that is just remembered annually? Napoleon?
Yes. Can you repeat the question? You know, your line is not so clear.
Okay. No, I was just asking, how would the people of Marikana like us to commemorate this very important day? Because a lot of the time we only go back on the 16th of August and the country seems to move on.
You know, what the most important thing is the closure. For what the callers are overlooking is the fact that ultimately the salaries were increased. I think that is an admission of guilt. It demonstrates that the mining companies were wrong. And that is the first aspect. The second aspect, like most of us who are contributing to this show, we are talking about the conditions, the living conditions, the roads and all that. It will be good to commemorate, you know, a closed chapter. We need to feel. I mean, we want the president to come as the man who actually used these connections, Natim Teta, Susan Shabangu, who actually used this influence to push the politicians to make a decision that led to the death of our brothers. So we want that to come out, because we do not believe that the Fallen Commission actually helped us. We believe that the Fallen Commission was just used as a cover-up. But we need the police to be criminally charged. I mean, we are not living in a Somalia whereby somebody can just come. I mean, if you look at where the miners were, they were next to the hill. They were not blocking the road, burning tires. They were just there on top of the hill. Why? Who provoked who? So it means the mine felt that it had a right to force these people to go to work, you know?
Yeah. Thank you very, very much. That was Napoleon Webster, who is an activist in Marikana, who joined this roundtable discussion as we were remembering Marikana 8 years on. And just to round off, Gia, you know, how do we make sure that this day is not one that just passes with every year and we mark an anniversary?
I think we need to hold the authorities accountable, Mahlatse. I think it's come to the point where we need to keep asking those questions. We need to keep asking why there haven't been any charges against police, why there haven't been any prosecutions to this day, why the situation in Lonmin itself, in that informal settlement, why those living conditions haven't been improved. And ultimately, we need to make sure that this doesn't happen again by ensuring that police have adequate training, especially when it comes to public order policing, because ultimately, this situation could have been prevented if they had used the water cannons, rubber bullets, and avoided using live ammunition. So ultimately, I think more focus needs to be done on how the police can act differently in a situation like this if it arises again.
That's all we had time for this evening. Thank you very much for joining me for the Inside Eyewitness News Roundtable. I was joined by Eyewitness News Assignments Editor, Gia Nicolaides. I was also joined by SABC reporter, Patrick Dintwa, and of course, former EWN video journalist, Taurai Maduna. That's all the time we had tonight, and we'll be with you again next week, Sunday.